Hey everyone, welcome to Module 12. We're going to continue talking about writing creative nonfiction, and in this module, we're going to talk about how we use the tools of fiction and poetry in our creative nonfiction. So even though we are writing the truth, and this is a different genre, we use the tools of other genres to write this one effectively. The reason we do this is because when we're writing creative nonfiction, even though we're writing the truth, we're still often telling a story. And so we can use the tools of effective storytelling to make our narrative essays sing and sound so much better and read so much better. So here's an example just from the world of publishing. David Sedaris is a really popular essay writer, and the reason that he's so popular is because his essays are widely enjoyable to lots of different readers. He does this because he writes about funny, true events that have some kind of poignant message to them, but they're often structured like short stories, so they're enjoyable to read. They have characters, they're written in scene, they contain a lot of dialogue, and that makes them very highly readable and popular with a wider group of people. So let's talk first about the role of narrative. Creative nonfiction often relies on narrative. It relies on us as the writer to put events in order and move through time in a storytelling way because that's how our readers make sense of what we're trying to say. Here's an example. I was 8 years old when my father decided we'd camp in the backyard. This is an example of a great opening with a specific event. It's true, and it draws our reader into the unfolding story that we're about to tell them. And it helps our readers, understand how things actually happened. When it comes to developing characters, all essays need memorable characters, just like stories do. And when you're writing an essay about yourself, you become the memorable character. And the interesting thing about writing in this way is that you're both the author and you're creating yourself as a character. So your actions are happening in the essay, but you are also narrating. So you have kind of a dual role in creative nonfiction as the writer. What are some ways to create strong characters, including yourself? You use specific details the same way you would in a piece of short fiction to distinguish people. Here's an example. Aunt Edna wore Christmas sweaters year round and dared any guest to out eat her at Thanksgiving. Often, the most memorable characters when I read are ones that are true characters. When I'm reading, say, a memoir and I'm finding out what someone's mother was like, or someone's Aunt Edna, for example, like here. Showing specific quirks in this example makes Aunt Edna seem very real. She's someone that maybe we have somebody in our own family who is similar and has quirks that are funny in that same way. The only thing you want to make sure you do, though, when you're writing, or one thing you want to make sure that you do when you're writing your characters, is you want to avoid stereotypes and cliches, because as soon as you fall into a stereotype when you describe a character, that's when we run into a situation where it's hard for your reader to identify with that person as a real character or as a real person in real life. What about dialogue in creative nonfiction? Dialogue, we use that too. It adds realism, it adds immediacy. Now, there's a couple things to consider when you use dialogue, though, in creative nonfiction. First of all, you want to only use snippets, not long conversations, especially for events that are further in the past, that are older events. Here's why. We, as your reader, know that you are recounting something that happened in real life. We also know that it's pretty hard to remember exactly how an actual conversation went, especially the further it is in the past. So When we read an essay where there are long pieces of dialogue, we know that that has been reimagined by the writer, and that may pull some of the truth out of what we're reading because this had to be recrafted from memory. One way you can kind of avoid that is by, again, using just snippets of conversation. Here's an example. "You're not going to wear that, are you?" my sister whispered. Something like that. You can remember somebody saying that to you. It's very realistic to see a snippet like that in an essay. And that might be kind of a turning point or an important moment in a story from your life that keeps that little bit of dialogue memorable. So short snippets actually reflect remembered speech. Long conversations are rare and less believable. Our readers kind of expect our dialogue to be more accurate for recent memories, so you can maybe go a little longer with your dialogue for something that's more recent. The biggest thing is to just capture the essence of what was said, and the easiest way to do that is to keep your dialogue pretty short. Now, what about scene setting in creative nonfiction? Scenes bring essays to life the same way they do with stories. Again, I know I keep repeating that, but that's what we're talking about here. Scenes bring essays to life by telling you the who, what, where, and what's at stake. Here's an example. "The kitchen steamed with the scent of boiling cranberries. Edna banged pot lids in rhythm, mumbling about the weather." So you get this scene right away. We're in a kitchen. We have we can smell what it smells like, those boiling cranberries. We can hear that Edna's banging pot lids, and you can hear kind of a rhythm in that, and she's mumbling about the weather. We have a whole story world created, although it's not a story, it's a true snippet of memory or a true snippet of something that actually happened. Again, um, you want to think about your scenes almost the same way you think about dialogue. They should be short, they should be vivid, and they're a little more concise than in fiction. Because again, we're rendering something that really happened and we're dealing with memory, and everybody knows how memory works. Also, the more short and vivid your scenes are, the better your essay will work in keeping things moving. Scenes keep the story moving and they keep your reader engaged. Now, not only do we use the tools of fiction when we write creative nonfiction, but we also use the tools of poetry. Some essays lean toward poetry. They're more like lyric essays. They have a rhythm and a music to the writing. They include fragments, images, white space, and surprising juxtapositions of ideas. Here's an example of how a fragment would look. Um, Morning, stillness, the syrup bottle stuck to the counter. Here's an example of what juxtaposition could look like. My childhood laugh, my father's silence. These poetic techniques can convey emotion and meaning. And if you're someone who likes to read out loud or listen to reading out loud, these are the types of techniques that you would probably be drawn to using in your creative nonfiction. Now, imagery and figurative language, how do those come in? And when we're using imagery and figurative language, we want to engage the five senses to make the writing vivid. Here's an example. The new snow was soft as powdered sugar. Through the window, I could hear the hiss and pop of frying bacon. So you've got the sound, you've got the visual of what things look like outside. We're immediately in the world of the narrative. Another thing you can do is use similes and metaphors to deepen meaning. Here's an example. Her patience was a river, slow but relentless. Concrete details are going to create lasting impressions in short essays the same way that they do in poetry. Now, another thing to consider is that diction or word choice always matters. Especially in this class, we're always writing in very short flash forms. The same is true for our creative nonfiction. And so we have to be careful right down to the very word choice, um, what we're putting on the page. Nouns need to be specific and concrete. Here's some examples of some very specific nouns. Teacup instead of cup. Those are two different visuals. If I say cup to you, you may, there's just a broad spectrum of what you may think of when I say cup. But when I say teacup, that narrows and specifies better the type of noun that we're talking about, or the thing that we want our readers to see. Same goes for verbs. They need to be accurate. Sometimes they can be surprising. Instead of saying moved, say darted, because darted gives a specific type of movement. Adjectives, again, something we have to consider. Sometimes people like to use a lot of adjectives because they feel like it makes the writing so much more interesting. But actually, using too many adjectives can be problematic and can bog the writing down. So, with adjectives, you want to use them sparingly, but you want to be exact in the way that you choose them. So, instead of saying red scarf, for example, you might say crimson scarf. Because there are meanings and feelings and implications and a specificity attached to the word crimson as opposed to the word red. Strong word choices are always, always, always going to make your writing more powerful. Here's an example of a sentence with strong word choice. He trudged up the hill, boots scraping frozen gravel. You can feel from that sentence the difficulty, maybe the cold, the scraping. When you hear about scraping on gravel, there's a sound to that. There's almost a feeling to that. You can see how much stronger it is to say that than to say he walked up the hill, period. Okay? So word choice matters. Next, let's talk about sound and rhythm. One of the pieces of advice that I always, always give, no matter what we're writing and no matter what class I'm teaching on writing, is read your work out loud. You want to listen for the natural music in your writing. Things to look for or things to employ in your writing, use unusual sentence constructions. Um, Here are some techniques for that. Lists are a great construction to kind of break up the writing a little bit. Here's one. We cooked, cleaned, cackled, collapsed. You'll also hear that that line includes repeated sounds or alliteration. Um, so not only do we have the list of things that we did, we also have the sound of all the C's, and we hear that when we read it out loud. We also want to include maybe words that sound like their meaning. That's called onomatopoeia. Here's one. The pan sizzled. The word sizzled is an example of onomatopoeia, and the sound of the word sizzle is actually the sound that the food in the pan makes. Sentence length variation also helps your writing read well out loud. So that variation creates better flow. So here's an example of good sentence rhythm. She waited, I worried, time slowed. Now, those three short sentences are put into the writing. You know, this would probably be part of a longer essay. And I'm not saying write in 2 word sentences for the whole essay. That's not necessarily the effect that you want. But what I'm saying here is having those three short sentences in the flow of longer sentences creates a rhythmic effect that can really enhance the sound and the meaning of the writing overall. Now, let's talk about putting it all together. Combine narrative, character, dialogue, scene, and poetic techniques to really make your creative nonfiction sing. Here is an example paragraph that kind of does that. When Edna shouted, "Next serving," the whole table erupted. Mashed potatoes flew, laughter echoed. I ducked beneath the gravy boat's shadow, tasting the dust of memory and cranberry tang, thinking how Thanksgiving always meant chaos, comfort, and too much pie. You'll see that that paragraph includes narrative, character, dialogue, vivid scene, imagery, and rhythmic phrasing. So this is how you can experiment some of these with some of these tools in your assignments as well. I want you to really think about that in your writing this week, that you reach into those techniques that we've already practiced with poetry and with fiction writing. Engage your readers, bring your true stories to life by just using some of the things that you already know how to do. Thanks for following along, and I really look forward to seeing what you come up with this week.